In this video, we're going to talk about frame rate, refresh rate, and vertical sync. If you're already well informed about each of these topics, this video might be a little bit of review for you, but video card prices have become more reasonable, and folks are more than likely going to be performing upgrades soon. I wanted to put out some technical content to help people who are looking for some of those basics and can better understand how to get the most from their money. Getting acclimated with some of this terminology and the basics can be really helpful when searching through reviews and comments as well. First, I want to break down frame rate, which is also referred to as FPS, frames per second. This is the number of frames that your video card can draw every second. As an example, if you're playing at 1920 by 1080 resolution, those numbers are symbolic for pixels, and each of those pixels has a specific color. Despite what the enthusiasts would have you believe, this is an extremely common resolution, also known as 1080p or Full HD. Even at this resolution, there are over 2 million individual pixels that need to be calculated to make a single frame. Multiply that number by 60 and you'll start to have an idea of why video cards are so important. That's a lot of processing. So having a separate processor do it, your GPU, helps keep your main CPU from having to do all that heavy lifting. This is how many pixels would need to be calculated in just a single second to reach 60 FPS at 1080p resolution. When you start to think about 4K resolution, 3840 by 2160, we're now dealing with over 8 million pixels every second. With 4 times as many calculations being done, you can normally assume at least a 4x reduction in performance compared to lower resolutions like 1080p. At this point, you'd need to be somewhere near the bleeding edge of hardware technology to keep up in most cases. With all of that said, and all of that calculation that needs to be done, none of that even takes into consideration all the different graphics settings that result in even more work needing to be done every single frame. If your goal is 4K resolution gaming, for example, it's much more accessible at that resolution if you start turning down settings to ease that demand on your video processor. Ultimately, when frame rate is being discussed, the average number of frames your video card can actually output every second is considered your frame rate. While your video card has its own limitations and capabilities, so do computer displays. Refresh rates may sometimes be similar numbers to frame rates, but your refresh rate is the actual number of times your display can be changed every second. You'll commonly see these numbers near that 60 frames mark. That's the limitation of the human eye. But that doesn't mean that your eyes, the monitor, and the video card are all working together with perfect timing. Monitors with higher refresh rates can accept and make better use out of higher frame rate output, but you should only notice a difference if something isn't in sync. That said, there's no downside to having a refresh rate much higher than your graphic capability, except the cost of those higher refresh rate monitors can be a bit pricier. Screen tearing is the name of the effect you see when your refresh rate draws between frames instead of in perfect time. It can be immersion breaking, especially in instances where your screen is meant to be updating quickly, like when you're turning your head. Vertical sync is a solution for this that attempts to slow down your video output to better match your refresh rate, but it's not always a perfect solution. It's a common graphics option within many games, but it only helps in the specific instance of screen tearing. If you see options for adaptive VSync, it's somewhat similar, but it turns itself on and off as needed. If your frame rate is lower than your refresh rate, VSync is going to do nothing of value, of course. While I might go deeper into game settings that can improve frame rate in a future video, for now I'll just say that if you maybe came across this content trying to get a boost out of your frame rate without a hardware upgrade, hopefully now you better understand how each of the settings can add up, depending on your resolution and any additional demands. Reducing resolution isn't always possible, or comfortable for that matter, but you can always drop all the settings to their lowest, and then increase as you like until you find the right balance. Thanks for watching today. Hopefully this brought some clarity to a couple of the terminology pieces out there. If you have any questions on this topic or maybe something related, leave a comment below. I have a few other planned pieces of tech content coming soon, so feel free to subscribe if you haven't already.